It runs out of storage like every once in a while. Sorry, I totally forgot what I wanted to see.
Oh, no worries.
Okay, cross-X doc is sent. People should open it. Maybe you're not ready?
Give me a second to download it. Okay. I'm good.
Okay, for sure. How does the 1AC bring the African mind, heart, and soul to futures thinking?
In what context?
Well, in the context of your evidence, like your 1AC Anderson evidence, how does the 1AC bring the African mind, heart, and soul to futures thinking?
Sure. So we have read the Anderson card in the example of how futurism is a valuable process that can bring in varying different identity perspectives. Anderson is talking about a variety of things.
For sure, it's all right. That's fine. What makes up the home front?
Sure. So the way our evidence categorizes it is based off statements by some Republican politicians, including Lindsey Graham, who categorized the United States continent as the home front and have said like, oh, it is better if missiles strike Guam, not us here in the US.
So the home front is just like a geographical area?
Well, we have not endorsed a concept of the home front.
Wait,
we have
what?
said others have identified the U.S. as a home front, and then that projects the violence onto others who aren't under that categorization.
Okay, how does the 1AC change that?
By getting rid of the missile deployments that would allow them to offset Chinese targeting on places like Guam.
The reason why the people identify particular areas as the home front is because of missile deployments?
There might be other reasons, but the way we have isolated, Lindsey Graham is like, look, we are putting these missiles over there. If China wants to strike them, they'll strike the Guamanians, not us.
I want to talk about the second piece of evidence in this document. This talks about how the military bulldozed 3,000 barrels to make way for a live fire training range. The shooting range is also to be sited atop the island's most important aquifer. Perpetual full-spectrum assaults from air, land, and sea, continuous bombings from mortars and missiles, sonar, torpedoes, hand grenades, reef-crushing amphibious landing practice. I guess my question is, these don't sound like nuclear forces to me. These are the demands of Pacific Islanders in protest that you said we should prioritize, I guess?
Yeah, so to answer this question, one, these are all part of the broader strategy of JADC2 that is centralized around the INF missile deployments, right? So the U.S. is advancing their deployments along the first island chain in regions like Guam, the Philippines.
Removes
the intermediate range.
Oh, sure, okay, that makes sense. So not the grenades, not the bulldozing burials. Okay, sure.
We think it would start a process that could...
that effective anti-nuclear activism might not be revolutionary protests, but might look like the Greenham peace camps. Are there other examples you'll give to defend the kind of public pressure that you think your model teaches us?
Sure. So our evidence also gives examples of things like the disarm movement, and while we don't endorse it in its entirety, we do think there is value in the kind of ways they approach dealing with nuclear weapons, i.e. protesting against instances of violence, arguing for the INF treaty, etc.
How does the 1AC teach us to protest?
Sure. Do you want to answer this question?
So we read a piece of Bind evidence that says when we tie sort of activist pressure to specific political demands, we sort of begin to understand how to break down the structures that permit and actively produce forms of violence.
And
it says that when you sort of
Bind evidence, we'll talk about that later. You've read a lot of cards about why the epistemology and education of the 1AC is good. If we win that it's bad, does that rejoin the end?
You have to disprove the material consequences of the planar path.
Of our epistemology.
Material consequences of your epistemology?
No, I said of the 1AC, of the planar.
Your partner said of your epistemology.
What?
You have to disprove the material consequences of...
That's not what we said. We said material consequences of the plan.
Oh, okay. One up and then case.
There is cases, wait, is there?
Do you have a preference on which case page I flow this case stuff on?
It's straight down.
Let me know whenever it's good to go.
I'm good.
Value.
I'm good.
Okay. Both readers.
Yep.
U.S. nuclear posture is sometimes by the science of laws of imperial domesticity
policy that one sees investment in a domestic anti-nuclear public reproduces militarized humanitarianism and necropolitics is Hanbach 16 military logic sleeping every domestic life militarized necessity culture nuclear country culture but militarization leads to the everyday domesticities when they compare to imperialism bound racialized national sovereignty cartographic desires these forge identity invested white colonial conquest under the U.S. under nuclear domesticity as a home for the nuclear families nuclear project and disarmament crushes neo-imperialist NGOs like cautious which redirect public sentiment towards increasing U.S. power while also expanding colonial interventions when policy leads to actual loss of weapons through new techniques for geopolitical dominance as Bond Graham 10 disarmament campaigns built toward for increasing U.S. spending of nukes as well as a more political foreign policy. The goal of foreign policy in the U.S. is to maintain control of nuclear materials, forget disarmament, lofty moral odds only matter with respect to geostrategy. Nuclear weapons comprise a small part of a much greater geopolitical game. News outcome the liabilities other states spend nuclear liberals fear that the U.S. can hardly attack Iran in the name of non-proliferation with no interest in disarmament would be hypocrisy about repackaging anti-nuclearism and vote fear of nukes to justify extension of U.S. control over the rest of the world. How shares that no other ways of acceptable anti-nuclear activism focus on abstract global problems such as the existence and possible use of nukes, those that are based on rival funding so long as they can't throw plowshares. Priorities are shaped by its board of directors made by Democratic Party donors and for-profit corporations that manage the nation's nuclear weapons. Allows public fears about nuclear weapons legitimate more aggressive foreign policy aimed at the regime change in Iran and elsewhere. And necropolitical violence maintains the White House national forum through deadly coherence of counterpositions. The one to see is an invitation to participate in empire that classifies the ongoing racialized genocides of trans-necroponics by refurbishing the civilizational imperative that undergirds the nuclear arsenal. The only response is militant opposition. That's Rodriguez 19. There was no state of exception just a normal disease reform refurbishing the civilizational imperative to the white national form is everywhere proliferating regimes of generational domination terror, inducing justice of subjection already enmeshed in the course of promises of suspended futurity for the civil enemy for fellow gender, racial domestic war survival for the absolute pretense is the insistence that there is a future to be shared to humanity that can be universal redemption entails making white being with all the gender correlates determines the jurisprudence according to conquest and permanence computing feeling and subjectivity imaginations the pretense of categorical brow through the fleeting inclusion of apartheid humanity apprehend the U.S. and the internal debate over the relative violence of white humanity that offers humanitarian in favors and accusations of backwards when such humanitarianism is rejected by the representatives of white humanity extend the helping hand there must be a militant opposition rejection of the invitation and the jurisdictional codes of nuclear domestic operations to transnational policies which arbitrary extends its mandate to the future the one sees the affirmation of the biopolitical imperative to secure the liberal form of life in the face of nuclear violence requires a corresponding extension of the necropolitical imperative of trans that is legal 22 trans necropolitics makes its presence known to limit the biopolitics mass multiplicity of killing to enable the proliferation of a biodynamic collaboration into management of life and death complicity with U.S. expansion politics fostering a certain kind of life you as liberal and while working extensively with that creating a necropolitical bringing that view the everyday death was that taking less transition bold spectacular and banal assimilation of slaughter necessity the symbiotic presence of life and death opening up cleavages of analysis of both the mundane spectacular order legibility reproduced by disenable by the argument solution of black people from the future privatization militarization criminalization function as the background of gay politics delineating which life have access to the future through and then active fostering that trans politics splits off the words of visibility and legibility from each other trans necropolitics are rendered trans deaths are rendered illegible even when they're spectacularized necropolitics society sovereignty linking the production of states to the reproduction of their subjects complicating analysis of sovereignty beyond identification with institutions of the state the jurisdictional discourse formation of sovereignty are established in everyday states recognition by the state multiplies the sovereign death distribution and the alternatives to state death the web of death unites the to opposition by accepting the honorable inheritance of the anti-civilizational that is always blooming in the undercarbon trades. Politics must compound upon the sets of the black radical tradition refusing the insidious policies and spilling up in very more radical politics that sees and scatters and also stays with us. Only this refusal of an invitation to debate can actualize the political space for alternatives to white national form that's Election 23. Give me a new card. The deaths of trans women of color and black trans women specific circular raw material for respectable trans subjectification have been set by African empire, border fortification, capitalism, incarceration, in war attendant necropolitics trans politics against the necropolitical form is going to offer pertinent to refuse the integrity choices offered by dirty machine of radical imagination nationalism advanced these debates occurring in debating the crosspoints of like insurance scholarship combining individuals build off one another to generate affinities using debates many ground house disagreements and organizing in that culture for active engagement and calling questions ourselves refusing necropolitical solutions opens up political space for alternatives to excel debates and practice lessons from rounds do not spill out they seep and scatter and also stay with us not black scholars must study the black radical tradition and see stable chance credibility with readiness and safety security and safe alternatives bloom in the outer commons and satiate dissonance and that facilitates collective care planning proliferates debaters and dead Louisville gather to overturn the violent rages of power in and out of the activity of some participants prefer instead corroborating with institutional grounds of civic engagement and liberal forms determine truths that they can just require inventive subversive practices developed by black competitors and coaches and proliferated in critical trajectories not black trans scholars must compound upon that with compound upon it with black intellectuals and to attend to our debt as an invitation to transform how we theorize in that political struggle we should not accept sacrifice of segments of our communities to secure lives of others we have to fashion new blueprints and imagine futures made invincible and rendered impossible refusal is an unending project what is assigned is it has to be accepted go to case I can't believe I have to waste my want to see time on this given they can now draw an interlinked crosses basing is a link on a linked turn first they're cutting stops before the end of the section which ends by saying that extra legal movements can and will stop basis second state-based elimination integration of military infrastructure creates the exact shifting of violence that they indict movements for, but worse because it maintains its presence without the economic and political cost of maintaining large bases that can serve as visible symbols for opposition. That is the conclusion of the 19 evidence. Dedicated anti-base movements always win some, at least some concession social movements have restricted the operation of foreign bases, block new base construction, and evicted bases, and can do so again after Ecuador evicted the U.S. government maintains some military ties and created a quasi-base in return of U.S. troops and bases in the Philippines is the most powerful cautionary tale within a few years of military's departure. Negotiators signed a visiting forces agreement that allow U.S. troops back for military exercises and training exercises to become a way to hide the near-permanent deployment of troops and counterinsurgency in the Philippines. Government insists the agreement will strike Filipino sovereignty and create no U.S. bases. The U.S. military now has everything and more than before, only now it has its presence without the economic and political cost of maintaining large bases that can serve as visible symbols for opposition, but even after moving to sheets victories, Philippines show demilitarization is far from done, and domestic and international pressure cause circumvention. The plan will be ignored and used to justify parallel increases that obviated that Sirota 22. Russia hides under pressure on Biden Hawks claim this is not a weakness. The U.S. cancels anything European allies already allowed to be answered. The president could increase spending of non-nuclear capabilities and find the relative changes in reduction without cutting the arsenal at all, repackaging the same old maximum policies under new legal can create a slippery slope. After New Start, Obama faced much wrath from Republicans. The nuclear industrial complex as well as scrutiny. He turned away from plans to reduce the law of the new ICBM program to proceed. The White House elected Tamara to oversee the NPR, leading to revolt by the defense establishment. The DoD eliminated her position, calling a big reorganization. The weapons program resulted in job lawmaker state chair of the Appropriations Committee's defense panel reiterated support for ICBM system based in Montana.
Yeah.
And their nuclear reduction streamlines empire becomes an offshoring of militarism to maintain the asymmetrical distribution of risk and value that makes coherent the political economy of imperialism. That's TADR 22. The shift in governmentality to risk and security entails disciplinary control movements are attractive risk assessment and police gleaned and shift from imperial use of counterinsurgency, proxy war strikes, drone warfare arena as well as patrol execution. The shift is encapsulated by transformation of bases to distribute sovereign capacities everywhere. A diffused and agile stance predicated on a dispersed network of floating lily pads from where strikes against road actors. Anywhere could be launched. The signal chases automatically. Not wars and events as the means of everyday governance. This new military logic is organized around as a means of everyday governance. This new military, the same risk restructure, its value restriction, and the 160's understanding of security is expansion of U.S. bases globally. It makes collateral damage of those whose lives and deaths make possible such an political military maneuvers. It is not the INF that makes colonial violence possible, but a broader structure of colonialism that renders lives and lands collateral damage. That's free all 18. Jennifer allowed as collateral damage allowed the U.S. military to access rest and recreation on equal relations to foster abuse crimes committed by the U.S. is inconsequential to American security interests and region depending on calls. These collateral damage considered again merely an isolated aberration and challenged by another eerily similar isolated aberration with the murder of Jennifer Lott outside the former U.S. naval base. The new soldiers who are subject to the ultimate protecting subject to the cost of sovereignty. American soldiers committing crimes providing also protective force to guarantee stability. Such narratives of military sufferings, emergencies, and contemporary movements of gender and racialized violence who register damages of these new military maneuvers against the backdrop of the incidental stories of base-related sexual violence becomes windows victims of the gender sexual violence, Nicole and Lauder rendered liabilities that disrupt the images of paradise. Desire motivates, including imperial groundwork for necropolitical extermination of local Filipino workers, negro capitalist practices of militarism function as prime military, industrial playground gender abuses marketed under the name of paradise and justified in the name of security cases. Nicole and Jennifer Law describe global capitalists disruptive redirective deployment into the sexual tourist industry, creating powerful images, fantasies, and desires inexorably tied up with race and gender to maintain imperial sexual designs of the U.S. military project acts are always refracted through desires of notions of colonized land people, especially women, passively there for the taking a form of extraction of labor from those condemned to death, whereby fostering a life already promised an individual's disposabilities, limited to serving the needs of empire capital with its economy hampered by debt to the IMF World Bank. The Philippines depended on being tourism impaired as by no means been natural. It's conjured through the dimension of labor sustained by economic apparatus, scared by the threat of reality of violence and promise of rescue, necro capitalist practice of organizational accumulation.
That part's heat, low heat.
Okay, you can send that off.
Yeah.
Let me know when you get it. Once Steven gets them, you good to start?
Yeah, I'm good.
Okay, yeah, just let me know, Steven. Okay. Yeah, just let me know. Okay, good. Okay, let's start on the critique, the alternative. Do you have to go for it?
We think that the alternative rejects the invitation of the 1AC, which is the internal debate, and says that there are alternatives living in the undercommons that are necessary to correct the way the 1C is invested in necropolitical solutions to empire.
Okay, that didn't answer my question. Does it have to be in the 2-R?
Yeah, we're gonna go for it.
Okay.
I think refusing the 1AC is good.
Okay, perfect. Can it result in the F?
No.
Did you not listen to what she
Like,
just
we
said?
said that the
I'm just
1AC is the
confirming.
internal debate,
Yeah.
and the judge says the
Basically, no
internal debate is the
voting
only
okay.
solvency.
Cool.
That's important.
The Rodriguez card, what does militant opposition look like?
Yeah, so I think that there's two arguments I'll make here. One is the Rodriguez evidence names the internal debate over the balance of white humanity, which I think is an important frame to understand why rejection of the invitation of the internal debate is necessary to solve. Because we've made an argument about how the 1AC negotiates violence within the bounds of white humanity, within the bounds of the internal debate, which say that there is no outside to empire. Instead, the alternative says that a rejection of that invitation is what opens us up to alternatives to empire, because sort of those undercommons debates that are possible outside the frame of the internal debate are the only thing that offer that possibility.
Okay, here is where I'm confused. All of this is categorizing the 1AC as if it was based off of like some government strategic policy decision.
No,
The 1AC is based off the people in Guam, the Guamanians saying we
disagree with that.
disagree with INF deployments, and the
No,
government
we disagree
responding to
with
the
that.
demands.
We
Okay,
disagree
why?
with that.
Unpack that.
First of all, the 1AC evidence you read about demands, which I'm pretty sure Spencer talked about in cross-ex, is not even about the nuclear weapons themselves.
It's about
It's about like a gun range in Guam, and the piece of evidence that Spencer read out in the 1AC that talked about grenades, bullets, etc. Police forces
Okay,
in
so
Guam.
so it's
Those are
basically
all of
just
those
like
less occupation.
so-
So
okay,
the
that's
argument,
basic.
the
Got it,
argument
got it.
is
So-
that is that the 1AC is a negotiation of the best way to like to colonize. It is not an end to
It
colonization.
evacuates the terms of
I got it.
protest and circulates them as kind of empty containers to shoehorning reformist
Yeah,
policies.
that there is a form of colonization that is better than others.
Yep.
We have rejected that premise.
Okay,
Yes.
sure. We're gonna link term that, but that's fine. The Hanaba card discusses conceptions of the home front.
We did.
The Jackson card read in the 1AC
Yeah, you-
says these are the
you-
status quo descriptions and the plan is in opposition to them.
No.
Why are we not
You
link
said-
turning imperial
You
design?
made a prior claim about military logic seeping into everyday domestic lives that prefigures your ability to access that claim. Putting
Okay,
the
yeah.
word home front in your tag of preempt RK is not an answer to this card.
What do you mean? It's not a preempt. It's an argument Jackson was making, but.
But you couldn't explain what the home front was in cross-ex, like it was kind of
What are you talking? The last argument, I guess, or last question I have, the Lawson evidence. What does it mean to stay in debt, and why can the 1AC also not be an example of it?
Yeah, we think that, well, so I think Larson makes an evidence about why all of our politics debate are indebted to the Black Radical tradition that has been forwarded in debate, like from Louisville to many instances that Bo talks about. But to answer your question, it says that necropolitical solutions to empire are ones that refuse to stay indebted, because it sort of trades off with the modes of life that are possible when we reject that.
We refuse
Yeah.
to accept the sacrifice of certain segments of our communities via reform is like a line that
That was the
Larson
line
uses
I was
towards the bottom. Yep, yep.
10 minutes. This one? Yeah, this one. Okay, no, wait. I'm saying. Let's see, 10:22, okay. It's just, order is the case and then the critique.
indicator. Yes. Panel.
Yep.
U.S. signed up deployment of the first island chain Greenland structural violence and actively ignores the demands of Pacific nations to demilitarize. That results in the endless war machine of the U.S. rapidly destroying essential modes of existence for those that exist outside the peripheral and Greenland's environmental destruction. Independently, deployment of JADC2 is part and parcel of a project to map the battlefield, making racist surveillance practices rampant in the Pacific Islands. Only the plan prevents the endless militarization of the island chain and sees those demands. Independently, militarization encourage escalatory pressures, provoking China via desperatory, destabilizing nuclear deployments that threaten the Chinese homeland. Only the plan reverses those dynamics by preventing the possibility for deployment. 1 and T1. Even if the card says social movements can be effective, they've failed to contest the part of the card that says state engagement and institutional pressure is key to actually disarm the missiles, which means that all acts is a prerequisite. 2, social movements themselves cannot disarm them, which means this isn't offense, but it all begs the question of whether or not the missiles should be there in the first place. They have no internal link argument about why post-plane violence would be shifted, which means that we get new answers. 3, durable fiat solves it, since our argument is just about shifting back, which we have evidence for. Redeployment is unlikely. Ability to move people and materials across theaters, even within theater, is a complicated process that is not well developed, especially in the Pacific. Answers Sirota and their indicted by Pertinent 22. The use of moving materials and people carries challenges to manufacture, delivery, transport, and movement within theater. All these challenges, a complicated set of processes are ill-defined, lack capability, particularly in the area of venture theater lift over water in the Pacific. Movement of material and people in the Pacific depend to a large degree. Ships and smaller watercraft are particularly challenging as they contemplate basing in austere areas. Their theater movement is not well developed, nor is their career consummate reading and the critique.
Or one more thing before you go on.
On the
Sirota card.
Sirota card.
About politics.
About
they have
politics.
no evidence the plan is unpopular. They're reading like a
Yeah,
policy link
they're
card
not
or
reading a
ICD.
card that says the plan is unpopular. They read a card that just says like politics in general, which does not apply. The critique. The role of the judge to weigh the fiat implementation of the plan against compatible alternative. The NEC must generate unique links to the plan text, and they all should be evaluated based on the scope of solvency. We can weigh the whole AF regardless of prior questions. 1 is fairness. Prior questions are infinitely regressive because the NEC can choose any arbitrary standard in the block. This moves 20C offense, sandbags to 1AR, and artificially inflates under the model. 2 is advocacy seals weighing and debating the consequences of the plan is necessary for detailed clash of topic education. Their model skirts these questions by shifting the focus to abstract prior questions that are opportunity costs of the plan. 3, INF debates are good. Centers diverse political agendas and allows us to deliberate upon a variety of different futures. Weighing the consequences of the plan are critical to coming to the right conclusion about what disarm movements ought to forefront, which means we internally turn their offense, which is when I see Corright and Anderson. 4, fiat is good and we get it. It's predictable based on the resolution and generates consequential forecasting, where we're forced to assess the broad consequences of the plan on a larger scale. It's best for clash and argument refinement, which is a prerequisite to making their offense portable. 5, it turns our offense centering stasis on comparative solvency is key to critical purchase and avoiding co-option. If alt solvency does not match the scope of their impacts of the links to our offense with 719. Critical area things to be rescued, never-ending conceptual reification, completely detached from the world requires not only to mass power relation to create space, but also create a generate practical knowledge for political action, offer alternative solutions to trunk linkage between alternativity and practicality can help critical security blend well with policy alternatives which contribute to subverting policy changes to translate critical knowledge to practice without compromising normativity and criticality, critical knowledge and engage with policy alternatives politically enabling forces away from problem-solving perspectives towards a wider framework of pragmatic thought where narrow instrumental goals are overridden by normative concerns to inform policy debates more prone to avoiding co-option by positive-based and problem-solving epistemic predators resulting in pluriversal order of the liberal peace being contrary to what is assumed alternativity is not incompatible with the constructive critique without alternativity fall short of reaching out to the wider policy community means the opportunity to transform structural discursive and performative practices that reproduce violence, limits their social political impact, and validates the existing order. Now, PERM do both. If the alternative results in more disarm than its plan plus, PERM do the non-mutually exclusive parts of the alternative, and no reason why disarming INF missiles trades off with staying in debt to each other interpersonally in debate. PERM do the plan in all in other instances only as reflexivity self-dealing public routine. Analytic diversity, later inclusivity, self-reflex awareness, self-reflex awareness, that persisted in history, our theories wrong because it matches the criteria for doing pluralism before protection from the hegemony discourses of bad theories is incorrect. There's no single correct way to explain any more to be realism analytical than that they'll spur more in interest, not less. Rejecting disciplinary practices remains true, but prior assault by Arab postmodernists and feminists and still hoping successfully shaking the foundations of most scholars ignore the first is ironic and seem conservative as liberating as a movement of neoliberal self-aggrandizement. Radical sources diffused by disciplining and ensuring their own organization. Now, the handback link is a non-starter with a 1EC already linked tournament. Their F assumes domestic stockpiles, but the whole point of forward deployment, and particularly INF, is to displace the burdens of securitizing the quote-unquote home front onto authorized bodies deemed disposable. The moment Lindsey Graham said, quote, if thousands die, they're going to die over there, they're not going to die here, ushered in a necropolitical understanding of missile deployment to the Pacific that only the plan can solve and is a prerequisite to their offense. Now, their blonde Graham and Tadir disarm links arguments. The plan propels restraint, not anti-nuclearism, Guston and 10. Countdown to zero, come under attack by Bongo. The article is mystifying. Leave aside the distributable guilt by association. Core argument is a long portrait of the boogeyman. This is strange. The film clearly states U.S. and Russia owns 95% of the nuclear weapons. Bongo says the point is built upon with belligerent policy. You would think the film featured Peril and Bolton rather than Gorbachev pleading for abolition. Bongo has a point that talking about danger risk building support for homeland security rather than disarmament, accusing of a nuclear subs like accusing civil rights of building up police professionals is unfair to blame for political conscious abolitionists who rejoice they converted old adversaries and anti-nuclearist politics that spill over to challenge other instantiations of militarism. Their resistance votes for Haas and Indian 12. How people are recruited to activism in their organization they join makes a difference for how long they remain involved in what activities they engage in. The anti-war movement is a gateway to left activism as activists are presented with opportunities to migrate. Anti-war paths are more likely to spill over such movements to the people who participate. Exposed to further opportunities for participation is 79% of it. Anti-war protesters spill out even though an individual may be recruited to a specific policy objective activism. New customers join multiple organizations. Anti-war organizers rely on allied movements focused on long-term problem, but activists need for sudden mobilization. They structure goals and ways easily comfortable with the goals of other movements. Build strength welcoming hybrid organizations that bridge anti-war activism and other movements. As a result, anti-war activism becomes a way to meet people that turn to an array of other causes. Now, the trial evidence is an add-on, not a link argument. Their evidence is all about why U.S. imperialism has manifested in violent military occupation of other countries through colonies. The 1EC has identified JADC2 and violent missile deployments as a new manifestation of producing that colonial violence abroad, which means there's only a risk the plan solves it and a permutation would resolve the residual link. Now, the thesis: pragmatism is necessary. State powers are complex and porous assemblage of forces that can be tactically pressured for contingent gains and reflected in decades of successful queer and trans activism. Hueneki in 22. To reject purposes, reject countless queer activist efforts, many liberal Asian movements press for legislation funding for queer priorities and policy changes that improve lives of queer people approaches and necessitate viewing the state not as a monolithic whole, but as a model assemblages of parts that can be pressured into acting that into the marginalized. This captures the reality of state actions as not emanating from a shifting pattern of governing actors questioning homogeneity allows progress, but queer theory to empiric assessments. It is a messy, pragmatic approach that's historically been the counterpart of radical strands of queer thought. Some only see violence, pragmatists make out violence an opportunity. We cannot just click our heels, make a better state. The state is power, and we often needed this means starting the state. For recognition pragmatically, without accepting these policies, can tell a constant relationship. We need to rebuild the state, even if it is not entirely clear why or how we need it. And you can embrace their critique of state power while still pursuing progressive changes. Collapsing back into total rejection and becoming ungovernable is ineffective, impractical, and counterproductive. Hueneki in 22. Most ideological will see work as deeply politically. Stanley announces the state expansion unable to offer us relief. Queer theory exposes dialectic violence. These maybe few confront what happens after some might do away with the state. It remains difficult to see how dire ever be addressed without large collective action, while it's hard to occur without coercive power of the state. Direct action that queer theory proposes has been successful up to a point, but has required state intervention. Queer thought offers valuable expectations of knowledge as a myth, but remains agnostic and openly hostile to it. Now, Rodriguez, the 1EC was already a critique of this. You can cross-point all the work I did on the handback evidence because they're essentially making the same argument, but we can strategically adopt humanitarian discourse without causing their impact. Bolton in minor 16. Campaigners operationalize critical error theories, made them use our own strategic adoption of the discourse. Humanitarians with problematic dissentary militarism does not make campaigners are beholden to mistakes of critical studies. Humanitarian disarm is an assumption that all campaigners have brought their own rhetoric. One can have a radical agenda while speaking the language of the diplomatic arena and discourse. Humanitarian disarm has been subversive, does not necessarily mean legitimation of the remainder problem. Now, the alternative, it cannot solve the case. 1. Debate does not shape subjectivity. All causes like friends, family, religions, etc. prove that even if debate is an internal link to subject formation, it is not the largest one, which means it's not sufficient to solve. 2. Missile deployments does not prevent INF missile deployments to the Pacific, which greenlights degradation of indigenous ways of life and encourages miscalculation pressures with China. 3. Debate is an inherently competitive space where judges are asked to select winners and losers. Using a debate round to seek relationality is worse for collaboration and mindfulness, limits the scope of the ability for the all to solve interpersonal violence in debate. Put down to 9. Debates are a conversation locating discussion for the competition managed potential for collaboration, contested coalition. Winning the vast majority of teams are interested in winning debates. Attention generated instrumental competition has been a component of debate from the beginning. Is not help for the goals to diminish competition. Change through wins generates backlash through losses. These hostile situations, one where participants need to work together as a competition for a win, and only one team can win. Go back to the
One more thing to say on the alternative.
The alternative
There's no reason the plan is not also in line with the black radical condition.
There's no reason why the plan is not also in line with the black radical tradition. They have not read a warrant or articulated an internal link argument about why that is true, which means when they do, we get new answers. But overkill is not universally experienced, even if it's unique in the context of their K. Differential access to water in Flint, Michigan is particularly a salient example of overkill Jackson 18. The example of it is a particularly important wars and continues to be a immediate intergenerational risk. Rescue cars were valued over their lives, caused by the slow deterioration of the city's infrastructure, not only class, but racialized. That happens through the privatization of water and stability to population. Water is the vehicle through ontological death, as a materials and semiotic mode of power is what Stanley refers to as overkill. Overkill should not be read only as individual pathology. That's fine.
Make it for cross-section.
Yeah, let me just get a drink. Yeah, I'm good.
Subpoint 2 on framework is about opportunity costs. How do the judges measure whether or not there is an opportunity cost to the plan?
Well, yeah, so the judges weigh an opportunity cost of the plan by seeing the negative has introduced a reason why the plan makes the status quo worse.
I guess I'm asking a more specific question about how the judges know the plan makes the status quo worse. Like, what is the bright line or metric by which we establish what an opportunity cost is?
Through like argumentation, like the negative says arguments about why the plan would produce worse things for the status quo, and the affirmative disputes them.
Okay, what does it mean to weigh the plan?
Like weigh the material consequences, understanding like how risk should be assessed in the context of all impacts the 1AC and 1NC both contain.
Okay, I guess I'm a little confused because you spent like most of the 1AC actually reading preempts, and you made a bunch of arguments about like why like listening to demands is good. Like, and clearly garnered offensive off of those things. What's the relationship between those arguments and the plan?
Yeah, we think we should get to weigh the material consequences of acceding to indigenous Pacific Islanders' demands, i.e. reducing escalatory pressures on China and resolving infrastructure build-out that damages indigenous ways of life.
We also think if you win an alternative approach about epistemology, we have a reason why our research project is
Sure, but if we won that the way that the 1AC, engages with those demands was bad, but you won the disarm of ICBMs was good, then you would still win the debate, correct?
Well, then we would still win the debate because the negative has to prove a reason why the demands we do not listen to outweighs the demands we do listen to.
Great.
If we
you made an
prove
argument,
INF,
I have
not
a follow-up
ICBMs.
question. Yeah, the spillover claim card that you read is about like recruitment into activism. How does the app recruit people into activism?
Well, I disagree that the evidence is like we recruit people into activism.
That's actually like verbatim what it said. I don't know what the
But I think the evidence is more in the context of when we base political action and movements against the state, based in state policy, we are more likely to result in effective policy
The first
changes.
line of this card says, how people are recruited into activism, the organizations they join make a difference for how long they remain involved and what type of activities they engage in. How are you recruiting people into activism?
Well,
Your card
we
says
think-
that's important.
We think the 1AC is a form of activism insofar as it accedes to indigenous demands. We think that would be a sort of good pedagogy to approach the issue of INF missile deployments. We think that is an example
Okay,
of
what type of activism does that produce?
activism that is anti-war, anti-basing, U.S. colonial violence abroad.
And
Okay,
anti-nuclear weapon infrastructure.
Okay, the Huneki card, can you give me an example of a state-based policy that would be good for trans people?
Well, I think
You read two Huneki cards that said the state is good for trans people. I want an example.
an example that has happened or an example that could happen.
Either, just give me one.
Like an example of like.
Could you give an example of maybe HRT or maybe
Just give me an
gender-
example. It's
like
fine. Give me an example.
Like I think
There's lots of
I think there are plenty of examples.
You want me to give an example? Sure.
Oh.
Things like
That was the cross.
HIV, testing opportunities,
HIV,
different other things like
Okay.
support resources.
Resources. Got it. Thank you.
10, sorry.
Yeah, I wanted the answer to that. Sorry, Pat.
7:15.
I will send, I mean, I never have cards, but I do have cards.
You said there were cards.
What's the order?
We're still
Yeah, we're
missing a
missing
Oh,
judge,
we're missing a
to
judge.
be clear.
Oh, gotcha.
But, I mean, it's K case. Okay, how the cards are sent, the order is, K, then case. On the K, I am not going to do framework. But, you know.
Okay.
Not mine. Okay. Anyone not ready? We are living in a global civil war maintained concealed by the internal debate that MSU is united to Spain and Rodriguez said the internal debate proliferates through everyday investment into its logics that set the terms of discussion, like deep engagement with reform in this round, which limits our political rights to modulate but never end the relative violence of white humanity. The one I see compels us to uphold the internal debate by calling for us to debate out disarm through instrumentality, which is exactly what Rodriguez talks about when they say that the terms of debate are set in advance through the inclusion of colonized people like those in the Pacific Islands that can only happen in and through the terms of such colonization to legislate the structure that dominates them at the expense of the existence of that structure itself. The internal debate runs on an exchange economy of violence that one sees like calls transdecker politics. Not everyone can access the good life, reap the benefits of reform, and embody the good citizen because some are marked as threats to the future of white cis life and civilization. Therefore, black, brown, colonized, and trans deaths are exchanged to continue white cis national lives. The world that they stabilize is a world of escalating war. Trans children are killed by their peers in schools as the anti-trans lawfare colludes with white supremacist militias and settler fascist resurgence, exploiting ever-growing levels of environmental collapse and economic precarity while ensuring extinction is inevitable because we're literally willing to destroy the earth to preserve white cis futures. Reform makes this warfare inevitable by standing in for more radical politics that could escape it, like the way that the money see invokes the demands of colonized people as an empty signifier which fundamentally stabilizes the global
order at the expense of resolving the conditions that cause it. That, alongside claims that the state is inevitable and we must engage politics, despite their failure to name what kind of politics we could engage that would meaningfully shape our lives in a different way, is exactly how insurgent energy against the slaughter of trans women like Ariana Mitchell gets alchemized into reformist debates over whether trans people deserve access to healthcare or bathrooms or name changes or whatever HIV testing that they talked about. The racialized and gender domestic war waged by reform prefigures international politics because it coheres the nation as an international act that must be protected. So our impacts control theirs, which is conceded in the 1AC. The internal debate is the theory of power. The impact turns engaging the ticky-tacky reform like they want us to, because it is dangerous for us to put trans politics into impact packages that could be neatly weighed against theirs and let them weigh the costs and benefits. The disarmed and shady rigged system of the internal debate, which rationalizes the necropolitical exchange economies that cohere the world of. Remember, your ballot could not intervene in the internal debate of nuclear policy making to stop any of the violence that they talk about, but it can join with our refusal to take up this space or reform. Reformist demands voting negative to leap in the intersections of black and trans studies that incline our time and political horizons in debate towards a world that does not require sacrifice of some portions of our community. It destabilizes necropolitical grounds on this world by teaching us that what is assigned does not have to be accepted now. The first argument I will answer on the floor is the permutation. First, we have impact turned the app. Clash over whether disarm would be good is the bad thing. No permutation can resolve that because all of them would include debate over disarm. Second, the perm fails. It narrows demands into a professionalized frame of abolition that locks in violence. Actually, 22 BC is credible demands to narrow institutional goals. The centrist will the center is continuously more conservative incrementals. Protest organizational imperative that change reforms can be celebrated as progress as those outside suffer preferential nature activism of committed people so entrapped they become de-skills. Those outside the halls of power change business, challenge business as usual. Reform will not save the planet. I will answer their non-mutually exclusive part with the necropolitics. I say they decide the process of framing radical demands through reform creates a bifurcation of revolutionary matters into respectable and disrespectable subjects. Think about how demands for trans liberation become demands for trans inclusion into the military, and then celebrated reform sacrifices certain portions of our communities and therefore cannot be affirmed. Often, alt and all other instances, all in sort of sense of the does not answer them, and then they're conceding offense against the logical range of perm. Finally, there's a self-serving decide, not a theoretical claim, it's a substantive one, because the Valencia Rodriguez card says that grifters and opportunists build their brand by making statements about commitments to abolition as a self-serving public identity to afford them to access to professional and social capital, which is what the 1AC has performed in this debate. Now drop down to the Hanabach evidence. I answered this argument in the overview about not going to die here. It is not true that they are not going to die here. That is, but the 1AC celebrates that they won't die over there in an imagined way at the expense of understanding how reform is the thing that causes people to die here, which is the overview that I extended at the top. Now I will extend the professionalization link here. The 1AC performs by political inclusion. They're translating radical demands for a world that cannot have nukes into the display counterinsurgency of the internal debate. They uplift respectful movements that decline towards reform will cascading anti-civilizational insurgencies that refuse the grammars of policy capture. Remember the Plashers example. They were radical. They called the abolition of culture and militarism that sustained nukes, but they accepted Democratic Party donor funding. Their politics were then de-radicalized into calls for policies like NFU that sustain the world as it is and have not even materialized decades later, but that uses abolition to clean their images while they support imperialist agendas like anti-nuclear interventions that prove the internal debate evacuates their politics of any content that can threaten its legitimacy and uses that to sustain itself. Think about 1AC cross-sects. They highlighted out the Anderson evidence to do a shell of Afrofuturism to circulate things like reform, but the futures imagined by Afrofuturism are not the same as those the 1AC imagines, whereby colonialism is rendered less apparent. This is how they perform this politics of capture in the debate. It answers their irrelevant fucking card they write about how the 1AC uses policy demands to get rolled back, but because the work that we're doing proves that they are a smokescreen. Or rehighlighting 1AC Vine proves the link for two reasons. One, they frame extra-legal challenges to the system as impossible, which is proven by the Hineki card. It creates a feedback loop that maintains the status quo instead of challenging it. Think about the way that they tagged this card in the 1AC, and then the way that they explained it in the debate that only the government can prevent it into effective challenge its own violence. That's just a misrepresentation of what their author fucking thinks. Vine says extra-legal challenge is good and possible. I'm going to cross-line here because immediately after cutting soft reads, quote, dedicated anti-based movements almost always win, which make you extremely skeptical of any attempt to frame themselves as making rational or empirical decisions based on the government. Why did they leave this out? Only our evidence can answer this question, because to make the concession that extra-legal means are effective would challenge and destabilize the status quo in a way that would be unacceptable and not compatible with what I see. This is what Rodriguez is talking about when they ask the rhetorical question, what would happen on the eve of white being's concession that Black Lives Matter, which demonstrates how their concessions are not in fact rational, and the things they've highlighted out are not rational. They're part and parcel of an internal debate with an agenda that can only ever allow for what Rodriguez calls a reordering of policing, of militarism, of bases. There are two subpoints and two impacts. As a subpoint turns the app because reordering is an additional mechanism by which failure happens, but they actually obscure the cause of militarism and bases. B subpoint, it outweighs. They require an affective reinvestment in systems of militarism that make egregious violence happen globally. Second, top-down policies create worse conditions than the status quo. They conceded this. Vine cites the empirical example of the return of U.S. troops to the Philippines after the bilateral signing of a visiting forces agreement that eliminated U.S. bases because the U.S. especially problematic for them because it violates that after government-based action, the U.S. military now has everything more than before. Troops operating off base and counterinsurgency operations, conventional weapons, all the things that they say indigenous people in the Pacific Islands are protesting against, who did and continue to do horrific things to the people there. There are two impacts. Case in point, no perm. Already highlighting is fantastic at proving the world the perm is not zero risk. It's in fact extremely risky because after the removal of bases, activist mobilization gets worse for two reasons. One, at the cost of maintaining bases gets funneled back into weapons budgets and grenade budgets, and two, prisons get spread out. It becomes harder to target or exploit local logistical choke points of bases. Basically, it turns the offenses Rodriguez work from above. Each warrant in this link argument proves our thesis that the YC is not an end to colonialism, an end to violence or an end to bases, but insidious shift in the frame of what we can see, and therefore what becomes coherent is violence. The 1AR must not be allowed any responses because we literally put the cards on the table, and the 1C, we highlight their evidence, we tagged it as a new link, and they didn't take it seriously. This flippancy is demonstrative of the way that their politics marks certain bodies as acceptable sacrifices. Now, the Rojas and Heaney card is if anti-nuclear policies are a benefit thereof, that will be in the framework debate, but when I see cross-looks out of examples of what removals they result in the free all card, this card is predictive about the removal of bases. The reason why sexual violence happens in the free economic sense that happen after the removal of bases because the INF and the World Bank and the broader necropolitical world in which we are, that is upheld by reform. Now, the reform good stuff, embarrassing for them to stumble for 30 seconds, not give an answer until we prompted them to approve their model creates ineffective evidence case. They don't get the tools to reform, but cascade this move to refuse it as counterproductive, which is another link that parasolization work I did above. Finally, reform good is not responsive to our critique about the way the reform is instrumentalized to produce more violence, speaking the language of the state while solving. I will cross my action for the perm here because it proves that it's counterproductive. Go to the case page. Remember when I see cross-text, the Pike murder evidence was tagged as INF infrastructure related to comical interpretation because nuclear forces are only one component of that infrastructure and a laundry list of all causes, which I, by and large, extended on the cave flow. They don't get a durable fiat because that's not how it works. These cards are predictive of after the money, but the affirmative does not stop us from engaging in a strategy or project of control because they don't get mindset fiat. When I see Channel 22, the impact matters regards survival percent track among the first island chains, the one whose core tax and Biden advanced intermediate original program, Biden transferred resources to conventional protection measures and made the attorney guidelines. Mark the card at guidelines that I will read the card that says they don't access DAD C2 because this is the thing that they are going to bank all their answers on. DOD 22 chats and teachers have their attorney for the department to pursue higher commanders with the capabilities needed across all warfighting demands of deterrence and necessary to defeat any adversary at any time across the globe. The JASI 2 spreads a vision and our approach to CT tries to force the only any attack they coupled with willingness to modify existing policies, authorities, organizational concepts, and operational procedures to deliver advantage commanders. JASI 2 transcend that single capability platform system to accelerate implementation of doctrinal change. Takes up the only advantage they have.
You good?
Yeah.
Okay. Why do INF deployments still need to happen in order to resolve necro-political violence?
Well, I don't understand where you're getting that claim.
Well, so like you've said, reform does not you've impact turned the idea of reform. We have said we should reform insofar as we should remove INF missiles.
Well, not only have we impact turned the idea of reform for the way wages domestic war globally, we've also read a piece of evidence, which is the Atchison 22 card that I read on the permutation, that says that using the channels of reform to do anti-nuclear policy is empirically the least effective way to do anti-nuclear policy alongside the one I see.
My question is more so like why do INF deployments need to happen?
But now you're putting words in our mouth. But now you're putting words in our mouth because we did not say that the alternative is a world that imagines INF deployments.
So what is the alternative imagine?
Well, the alternative will be in the 1R, but the alternative imagines a world of debate where we are not focused on the questions of reform, right? The alternative says that we should not have had to engage in the eternal debate of the YC, that we could have had a different debate, and that debate would have offered the kind of solutions that the Atchison card talks about, not only to resolve your impacts, but also to resolve ours.
My problem with that, though, is that Atchison is advocate of the TPNW, major reform of nuclear weapons.
Did the YC say the TPNW, girl? What are you talking about?
My problem is you've impact turned the idea of reform. You've then read evidence from someone who advocates reform insofar as the TPNW.
Because there's a big difference. No, first of all, this card says that working from outside the halls of power is the only way in which kind of anti-nuclear demands could ever overcome the limits of the internal debate. Second is that this is just not you are missing the point that the alternative is not a question of whether we imagine that we have resolved the INF, because we are making an argument that is not the debate we should have had in the first place. You don't get it.
So you're missing the last part of my question. You've said you've impact turn reform. We have evidence from a author
That is
who
not-
advocates reform and has actively achieved legal signatories
what are you
for
talking
a
about?
treaty.
No.
Why does the plan not result? Why is an alternative not an example of reform?
What are you? Because well, first of all, I don't think you've heard the speech about what the alternative is yet. I explained it a little bit, but we could, I'm telling you that the terms of reform are not the terms over which this debate should happen. The Ashton card says the terms of reform are not the terms over which anti-nuclear advocacy should happen.
Sure.
Okay.
Okay. The re-highlighting of Vine. I guess what do extra legal strategies that are successful push for?
Well, an end to a world that could have colonialism, an end to a world that could have necropolitical violence.
Does that allow a world of INF?
It disallows a world where we use the plan to achieve a reduction of INF because we are winning, that produces necropolitical violence and while actively obscuring the kind of politics that could result in an end to that world, right?
Before the 1 hour, I'm going to take a second to grab 908.
It'll just be the K. I'm doing framework and then the alternative.
Is there evidence?
No, there's no cards.
You said framework then alt.
Is everyone good to go?
Yeah, good.
Sounds good. Our interpretation is to evaluate the one C as the intentional curation of scholarship in defense of the resolution, the role of the negatives to disprove the desirability of that project in circulating and curating the one C. If we win, framework is both an independent offense to the ask model of political education and means evaluating research projects as map about the plans of implementation, because that is the internal debate that makes me of impact and the burden of rejoinder over the question of the plan, because the debate they want to have is a suturing of the internal debate, which means they can win the offense good news still, but negative is evaluating why political orientations are good or a cloak for excusing the constitution of imperial projects, because they've already predetermined for the limits of political impossibility or set to coordinate how we use the skills we gain from debates about disarm. With the two pieces of offense, first is the neutrality, disad the jurisdictional placing of the terms of debate through fairness clash allows the reordering of the internal debate to maintain genocide by apologizing the terms of debate and preventing the insertion uses of the space proven by Jimmy C. Cross acts when they spend most of the 3 minutes talking about why we should listen to indigenous demands, but then say they can effectively kick out of those as long as they win the plan is good. The 1 AR will grant consent of frameworks as you can still win the K, which is way hypothetically, which is a reordering that produces the middle ground within the internal debate the midst of places the horizon of our radical imaginations in order to undercut the radicality of our critique. Second piece of offense is the undercommons pedagogy they said, which turns most of their offense here. The internal debate tells us the only skills research oriented towards the supposed greater good and valuable. But remember that necropolitics means the extension of life for some is always accompanied by the reattraction of life for others. Theories say only the margins of nuclear debates opens up spaces for insertion, pedagogy, and planning of theorizing through the pain of the present. The activist made a society of insertion, something where we can compound interventions and build strategies of one another to generate new affinities for ongoing survival. The Larson says are critical to black and transmitters. This creates space for collective and intimate care while we proliferate alternatives to the world and model. Actively trades off because it dispels the possibilities of living outside of empire. That'll be in the alternative. First way, the plan is self-serving, because especially when they spend 3/4 of the money greedy, preamps of arcades, not reciprocal if they get offense off the ethics external to the plan, unless they weigh offense about the plan versus their research project, which you should refuse because we're questioning the foundation of reading the app in the first place. 2 1 is fairness, A is turned by both dissents about B. It's inevitable, 9 off debate, signing policy, outskirts, resources, all create unfair debate. C, the impact of professionalization comes first, because the terms of their fair debates are measured by prior dogmatic assumptions about what we should be debating about. 2AC2 is advocacy. 2AC cross says opportunity cost is determined through in-round negotiation. That is bad. A, under their model, it's what Rodriguez calls the relative balance of white humanity. B, it's transnational politics. It's impossible to weigh things like dysphoria or trans antagonism against the plan, because I cannot and should not have to explain to you why the magnitude or scale of transphobia is which turns a foundational assumption that opportunity cost models are good. 2AC theory deliberation is turned about. That was our argument about the terms of deliberation and the internal debate. 2AC4 is fiat. 1 is bad. Less than paper over things like other demands made by indigenous populations about grenades for being detonated by their homes under the guise that nukes are bad. Second, fiat is a tool. It's just a tool for analyzing policy impact during that process. 3, it's not real policy. It's passed by ballot for impacts proximate to the round, because the way we engage debates does matter. Less than paper over things like other demands made by indigenous people about grenades being detonated, which I made the argument about. Last argument was co-option, the warrant of the evidence about theory being completely detached from the world. We're linking that fiat is detached from the world, not the alternative, because we aren't policymakers. Larson evidence is very clear on the material impacts of debates about the limits of our politics. That is material. The alternative, the internal debate of empire, compels us to ask a certain set of questions about the world. How can we improve the logistics of the military industrial complex? What indigenous demands should we listen to? That proof Michigan State should begins with the assumption that global order is necessary because it is a justification for the plan, and subsequent material action relies on the incorporation of repressed voices into politics and the circulation of their demands in order to say that 3 judges should vote affirmative. The alternative tells you to make a choice instead to say in debt. Pope holds from the histories of black debate and transmit their mutual intent and collapses them into a thesis claim that what is decided does not have to be accepted in the bounds of the internal debate. The violent position of sex and gender are to our bodies, the erasure of the histories of debate in the topic committee's limits and again the politics of our epistemological orientation of this committee. Each frames themselves as mandatory, but our imperative is to refuse that assignation. 2AC1 subjectivity's argument is a joke. It's obviously not true. Debates have no effect on our lives. People have job scholarships and friends from debate, and Larson says that the content informed debates matter too, i.e. Louisville. It's a question about meaningful black participation in debate versus liberal inclusion to dominant debate styles proves the content matters. 2AC2, none of the offense or defense debate to the alternative is applicable because the alternative explicitly refuses to engage in the internal debate, meaning we do not have to win to solve the impacts of the plan. The refusal of their projects is the only method of solvency we need to win, because this seizes the means of intellectual production which are captured by the internal debate by refusing inclusion and participation within their model. 2AC3, debate about collaboration is wrong. Larson says gender potential black and trans debate compound on each other to move towards solutions that seep in scattered rather than spill up. Only the alternative activates the law of potential debates may event to proliferate the forms of trans and black life through insurgency that both says that today debates again do not spill up, and instead they stay with us because the affinities and solidarities we cultivate or us in debate orient us outside of the space which impact trans their attempt to delineate the inside and outside to the round versus the ballot. 2AC4 indebtedness is not mutually exclusive. Is wrong. 1, it's a question of their model debate plan focus in the spill of the Bilbo critique. Second, yes, it's mutually exclusive. Let's talk about the fact that they read a whole ass card about RF futurism. The 1AC didn't fucking mention it once in the 2AC and spent cross lying about what the warrants of the card about being futurism broadly that disavows the scholarship they are intended to improve the link about co-option. Third, they're very clear that there is no alternative to empire is how the internal debate maintains its hegemony, because it requires that we disavow or death people who proliferate alternatives every day, which means we outweigh and turn every argument they go for about why the state is good or insurgency is bad. And indebted politics is one that commits to an idea that debates we have about nuclear systems are one that can be for each other. For example, in round 5 of the Indiana tournament, when we were up against Baylor, reading an app about capitalist accumulation of nuclear forces, and they predicated about Palestine, which led to a debate about the exportability of our taxes, the material demands made by Palestinians, and the intricacies of resource distribution and insurgent tactics that lead us towards research centered around Palestinian liberation strategies, which link turns the assets attempt to solve via indigenous demands. Or around 1 of the Long Beach tournament, when we were negative against James Madison, they read an app about the gender dynamics of nuclear violence and material impacts that figure white womanhood on nuclear colonial projects, and we read a negative strategy about their theorization of gender as related to transfer relationships to gender. In that sense, saying that it's a project that confronts empire's internal debate, refusing to accept liberal reform is the best outcome of our time together, and shattering logic that there is no alternative to empire. The access body politic would ask you to suspend a relationship to this tournament or this agreement to become an endorsement for hypothetical reform, but rather than accept an endpoint of reform and stabilize crisis. Both says that we have to dream bigger, but daring to imagine the future is made invisible and ready to possible.
7:35.
Mm-hmm.
4:12. Actually, 4:12. Okay, 4:08. There are two clerks that were
Yeah,
sent.
we're also still missing Josh.
Yeah.
Feel free to make this happen.
That's unfortunate. the case, starting with like the overview, permutation, and then framework recall.
So start
We'll
with the
start,
2 and Z and then work, do
Yeah.
framework.
yeah, do the 2 and Z and then we'll go from
And then, yeah.
I'll
Just
sign
let
it.
it, yeah.
Yeah.
That
Don't worry, I'll
works.
sign this. Okay. Anybody not ready? Iowa? Okay. The case outweighs the turns decay, no terminal defense to the 1AC means we have 100% risk of our offense. JAT-2 is coming now into planning the demands of specific islanders, causing material violence against them, like pulling over their graves, etc., which is only resolved by the 1AC. They have framed the critique as an impact turn, which means they've conceded this is valuable offense, but haven't read impact defense, which means arguing for an impact turn is incoherent. Second, they've conceded escalatory pressure ensures nuclear escalation because trying to misattributes assumptions. Only the plan de-escalates the situation by removing the missiles that promote escalation in the first place, which means they've conceded a scenario for nuclear escalation, which causes extinction. They've also acknowledged that even the Anderson warned that even if extinctions are ongoing, it is important to act against them in the status quo, which is the reason why our impact analysis turns and outweighs theirs. Then they say, like, durable fiat argument. They literally are just going for a critique about circumvention. They have no extension to why this doesn't apply. We've read multiple pieces of evidence that indicates it causes a spillover effect, meaning, i.e., we take away the missiles, and it undermines military planning in the instant. It means that you know at least there's a risk that the plan is a good idea, and even if they went broader, there are other issues. If the alternative solves the permutation, obviously would as well. Yes, we get durable fiat, it's reciprocal. We shouldn't have debates over whether or not the plan will be rolled back later, which is preferable. It's only a question of how those things get oriented in particular, which is a reason we don't need mindset shift, and a reason that'll be answered on framework before I should get it. Them off is not exclusive with other movements, i.e. you can do other things against missiles, etc., but we've isolated a specific instance where movements fail. Lastly, they read this card about JAT-2 does not answer our internal link. We have specific evidence about spillover. This card just says it's the desire of the military. It does not answer the missile warrant, which is the reason why our analysis comes first. Agreed. The alternative, internal debates, is not an investment or something the affirmative can travel with. This is proven by the cross-exam arguments. We are not the same thing as invest in a government strategy, rather are using outside perspectives that are historically unconsidered, like the Guaminians, and introducing them into discussion, which is something that Link turns their framing out internal debates because it creates a more expensive or outside. Then they said extinction inevitable. It's not, but will be post-AF, which was impacted above. And Anderson said, even if extinctions are happening, it's important to act against them in the status quo because total extinction is a different kind of a dynamic. Then they said the invoke simpler demands. The AF is not a simplifier. Instead, the critique is not a prerequisite, but rather the affirmative is a prerequisite to the critique, because in the world of the alternative, the missile deployments still exist, which means you know the violence is inevitable. They made a balanced argument. The ballot is only a referendum on who to the better debating. If we win our framework, it proves we get an impact, but they just said nay, take a leap. That obviously is not responsive to our interpretation. Now, the permutation solves all of their offense. They conceded the Sterling Volker card. It has an impact that was embedded. It says that it's important to create subjects who are ideologically reflexive and engage with this in circumstances, which turns all of the alternative sovereignty arguments out engaging in different spaces, because it's only the word of the permutation that trades activists who can engage in both kind of dynamics. The solves Zen's critiques. This card is literally just about reform broadly, not in the context of the INF, and we have here examples of that being effective. Then they made a necropolitics DA. This is not a link. Nothing about including the permutation would be a celebration of that inclusion. It's actually a link term, because the framing of no plan would actually result in a celebration of no INF, which is bad, proven by the impacts on the case base, the self-serving DA. How in the world nuclear violence is bad in every context? The app is a way to stop in their particular engines, and they have no framing for contingency that matters in regards to the permutation, because they have to prove a reason why the plan is bad, not a reason why other things, etc., might not be good. The framework debate. Extend our interpretation. The block did not answer our specific nuances. You cannot weigh prior questions and all have solvency burdens. They can get their critique, but you should evaluate the debate like a plan versus counterplan debate. I'm extending two pieces of offense. The first is fairness. Their term of evaluating scholarship to deny the project is arbitrary, self-serving, and shifts the terms of the debate to minimize engagement, which destroys predictable off grounds few times and impossible to use as a criterion for deciding the ballot. Their only defense was that fairness is inevitable. It's not. It can be skewed by things, etc. But even if it is, it's a question of how that fairness is operationalized, and their term is arbitrary. What would it mean to evaluate a scholarship project, etc., which is obviously worse. They made a resourcing argument. Procedural fairness turns in resource disparities are inevitable, but only having an equitable starting point ensures that everybody wants to get to the debate can have the same. Otherwise, structural fairness inequities are magnified by procedural fairness inequities. They said dogmatism, there's no impact to it, but fairness would also solve it better because it corrects against judges' interpretation. Now, INF debates, they are uniquely valuable. The Courtright card says they are important in context, which turns a lot of the alternatives framing about possible debates because they have not chosen to engage in one, i.e. even if they're right about other debates they had in Long Beach, etc. being good, this is another example of a good debate they could have about whether whether or not getting rid of missile deployments in the context of INF is good or bad for Pacific Islanders. Instead, they've ignored the conversation altogether by just advancing broad arguments about necropolitics, which is not applicable. They had two pieces of offense, the neutrality stuff. There's no link to this. The 1AC is not a neutral endorsement, but it's rather a positive endorsement for effective ways they can be allocated, which is something they have no defense to. Secondly, under commons DA, there's no link to this, but we also solved it better. State engagement is inevitable in every context, but we're the only model that can actualize how people should and should not engage with the state, which is offense. The fiat is bad stuff. They just said it's a tool of analysis. We agree it's a reason why you should evaluate in context with 1AC specific evidence that says it's a useful toolkit for challenging anti-bait activism. Now, their link arguments, they make no sense. The name Linkwall and Permwall are backwards. We don't bias support and link gradualism from prevail, which proves they have a link to their own critiques of reform by endorsing people like Ray Atchison, who have intentional sanitarians of the TVW, who have no external, including the act and the fighting against colonialism, or also 22 breaks with the impression that disarmament is running into conservative supporters have the urge abolition, opposite way we can insurance capitalization, disarmament is vertical, the decision approach to the gradual rather than sudden revolution, nuclear free will, transition approach to concrete effort, across the world, ultimately the universal disagreement, that after opposed to such a complacent apologies and disarm, advocates were surely welcome to reference. The alternative fails, only the perm gray line approach can solve efforts in 20 Goldilocks or represents an approach to nuclear ocean, which are the proclivity to global catastrophe isolation is too great to do zero is too soft state to nuclearize that most aggressive strong people cannot overcome nuclear weapons, meaning global secret, so leverage for play, we're going to disarm all states, significantly improve international political powers, non populations, and continue to resist. No progress. The Vine stuff that was answered on the other page, missiles an exception to all of the other causes, which was explained above. They said celebration. We have linked turned their arguments about the home from. Lindsey Graham has conceptualized it in the status quo, but the plan is a way to reverse those things, etc., which proves we're valuable. This top-down approach was wrong. All of this was answered on the case page. The perm obviously also solves any kind of other framing, so it's responsive. The alternative. The act is there's no reason the affirmative is not in debt, especially to things like disarm movement, etc., plus the black radical position, which proves it's not mutually exclusive. Framing issue. The alternative cannot solve any of the broader impacts of the case, and there's no reason why our education is bad. We have one reason why theirs is bad, plus family, friends, etc., all thumb internal link to solvency. The futurism link doesn't make any sense in this context with isolated particular reasons. They have given you examples of debates, but ignored our example of why our debates are good, which means they cannot go for it as a fairness halt or framework halt.
7:15.
Okay.
Really, Rob?
Sorry.
cold has it been in Iowa recently?
Not bad, actually. It was raining a lot, like, the couple days before we left, but...
That's kind of the same for us. What part of Iowa is?
It's in Iowa City, so it's like an hour away from Illinois.
Oh, it's not too bad.
Yeah.
It's nice, actually, yeah.
Yeah, I'm from Chicago, and it's only like a 3.5 hour drive, so.
That's not bad.
Oh,
That's...
Good time.
Just have like an innate sense of how long prep time is.
That's awesome. The order is like A. Like, there'll be an overview at the top, and I'm also got like full framework up to the top, but...
Okay, so I should start where I flowed the 2NC overview and then go to framework?
That makes sense to me, yeah.
Cool.
Like, it's content, yeah. I'm gonna honestly be kind of short, so...
Yeah.
That's me listening for sure. Okay. You know what, I'm gonna flip what is on what screen, so I'm gonna make this easier to see. Just kidding, that doesn't. Oh, alright, whatever.
Just thinking.
Yeah. The question of this debate is not whether MSU has invoked Pacific Islanders. Instead, the question you should ask when you think about the ballot is how have they taken up and mobilized radical scholarship from Afrofuturism to radical demands like decolonization in order to justify reformist policies and spread counterinsurgent propaganda about reform being the only way to resolve violence. The trigger will be heavy on both the 1% risk link means we solve claim, but that misunderstands our arguments. You should flip your calculus. Even if they win that they solve some harms, we've won a broader thesis claim about the internal debate that proves that the terms in which they call us to engage are by alchemizing the demands for an end to this world into the terms of reform that sustain it are a call that is ultimately sacrificial because it produces and wages an ongoing domestic war on black, trans, and indigenous life. Proven by the Plowshares example that goes dropped in the 1AR. This Plowshares were a radical disarmed group that took up demands for an end to nuclear weapons just like the 1AC did. But they accepted Democratic Party donor funding and acceded to the same terms of reform that the AF does and failed to materialize even the most symbolic of changes like declaratory NFU literally decades later. It is embarrassing for them to read this gradualism good card that they are going to try to go for because the author of the first piece of evidence that they read, and they are not so card or whatever, is literally from the Plowshares. We have a conceded one piece of evidence, the Bond Graham evidence that indicts that organization and says that they are counterinsurgent and must not be trusted. Therefore, you should read the 1AR's attempt to say reform is the only option as an additional link. Now, drop down to the framework flow because this is a framework debate. The internal debate is a dogmatic and overwhelmingly dominant framework in doing the status quo under which most discussions on this topic have played out, which means that all of their education is not unique. It is a disembodied politic that opaques our position within global power. We should therefore prefer our interpretation to value the one I see as the intentional curation of scholarship and defense. The resolution we have critiqued our burden of rejoining the plan because the types of debates that rejoinder would produce are counterinsurgent. It does not matter if you wanted a different framework interpretation because they have conceded that this is the thing that we are going for is bad. Every link demonstrates why engaging on those terms is ultimately narco-political, even if it happens in ways that are not made legible in the framework of things like extinction, that neutrality decide frames out all their offense. You should reject the impulse to on their impacts outweigh because that is not neutral or equally negotiated. Drop forward about the incorporation of indigenous demands into their call for the plan while simply saying that those demands don't matter as long as they win the plan itself is good. Proves the intentional process by which they've skewed the debate to make the plan benevolent and policy making the only option or inevitable. That trades off the 1AR drop both warrants for why fiat is bad. ASA pointed papers over other bans made by indigenous people about things like grenades or gun ranges that I pulled out in 1AC cross-sex and they have not had a convincing answer to. Visa point the ballot does not enact the plan. It's literally just a fiat as illusory claim that they have conceded, which proves our trade-off argument. Your ballot cannot solve their impacts, but it can send them back to the drawing board and prefer impacts that are proximate to the round that are embodied, because those are the types of insurgency that we proliferate through. Those embodied debates matter, and they matter more than the kind of non-unique debates that would happen under their model or dropped or impact turn to opportunity cost framework makes the judges weigh the impact of the plan against things like dysphoria, trans antagonism, or the way the 1AR says it doesn't
doesn't matter if some indigenous people continue to be killed post the plan, because notice the way that they have shifted to extinction. We have impact turned to that because we are winning an exchange claim that I'm going to cross-select from the top of the 2NC overview here, because the opportunity cost negotiated round versus the plan puts the onus, for ACE plan puts the onus on translators to explain violence that might happen or quantify dysphoria, which is impossible to do and is bad because these people do not understand it. And B, some point it creates the logic of exchange whereby we accept some contingent forms of violence which sacrifices segments of our communities at the expense of preserving others, which is what the Bow evidence says that you should refuse to do. Turn self-serving and way the plan is most self-serving and most offense. So most of the money see, notice how they said that they get to weigh all that shit as offense against us, but we don't get to weigh any of that as offense against them. It proves that they are the shifty ones. And the impact of rationalization also comes before fairness, because the debates don't happen on their model are considered fair because they decided that they were fair in advance. They negotiated the terms of the resolution within a frame of the internal debate, but those are terms that we have not agreed to, and you should not hold us to the standard of joining them. No turn to access, no warrant for KYK debates are structurally unfair. They are the most, they are in fact the most fair. The link debate.
Sure.
The Vine link, I'm going for the professionalization card using the Vine link as a word. This is probably some of the most in-depth link articulation that you have seen all year. The framework debate structure you're willing to vote on and refuse to capture our links within the terms of policy debate, like weigh a plan versus a counter plan and decide which one's better. Josh, I saw you react to that in the one area because this is a frame that we have impact turned and they should not access. Conceded that it's a smokescreen because dedicated anti-based movements almost always win, which happens at the conclusion. The Vine piece of evidence, which is what 1NC Rodriguez talks about. The question that 1NC Rodriguez calls you to ask is what would happen on the eve of Webby's concession that Black Lives Matter. That rhetorical question demonstrates how their conclusions are not rational. They have stopped cutting the card where they have because it is a move to sustain the coherence of this world and to refuse and to sort of obviate the fact that that indigenous demands from the Pacific Island would look like decolonization, not an end to some treaties. Second, top-down policies create worse conditions than the status quo. Vine cites empirical examples of return to U.S. troops post movements like the plan after the Philippines, after the bilateral signing of the visiting force agreement, where the U.S. instituted a public governance via to territory, which would be hugely problematic for them because the U.S. military has been everything more than before in off-base counterinsurgency operations, conventional weapons, etc. That is all the work I did in cross-sex. We should not use the Pacific Islands to simulate internal debate over what the proper form is to colonize the Pacific Islands. There is no way that they can say that we promote non-engagement. We instead impact turn the professionalization via the bond grab evidence I did in the overview. All that impact turns the permutation, because any permutation includes the thing that we've said is about engagement over the terms of reform. Dropped it, did not hear a word on that in the one area, which means that cannot solve any of our impacts in this debate, nor can it resolve any of theirs, because the only thing the ballot can resolve is stepping back to the drawing board. Now, the alternative, the way that they have positioned the office debate is parasitic, professionalizing, and violent, whereas the alternative embraces the radical horizon of decolonization that is pedagogically valuable. I've taken out all their debates or valuable claims of the Ashland card that I explained in crosses, but they produce insurgency at the expense of the kind of generative debates that we might have over kind of decolonial cause in Palestine, which is the examples that are conceded from debates that we've had against teams like Baylor or against GMU.
What was that?
We have 408.
408, starting. Okay. The order is the case and then the K. It'll be like starting mostly like where the 2NR started on framework, and then just go down the way.
Sounds good.
I'm just making my computer bigger so I can actually read. Okay. Panel? Island? So I need to make both of my Excel sheets readable. Post-INF missile deployments demolish indigenous ways of life in Greenland escalatory conflict with China. They're the most recent manifestation of the U.S.'s desire to map the battlefield and inflict their will onto anything that stands in their way. Voting affirmative is in alignment with indigenous Pacific Islanders' constant demands for demilitarization, prevents further military buildup in the region. The negative has actively shifted the debate away from the consequences of what doing such would create for international conflict and Pacific Islanders themselves, which means we control, try or die. You cannot separate the material justifications for the plan from the consequences of our scholarship, which means even if you conclude negative on framework, you still have to weigh the case versus the impact of the link argument, and they have actively refused to engage the case beyond some very vacuous and unimpacted out link arguments in the 2NR, which means any new extrapolation you do for them should be unjustified. You should not fill in the gaps for them based on the prior knowledge of their theory or prior knowledge of what their link arguments were earlier in the debate. They did not make those arguments in the 2NR, so you cannot make them for them in the RFD when you look me in the eye. The critique, the negative needs to prove that the outcome of the plan is bad. They're to question the desirability of the plan by introducing alternative frameworks through which to evaluate the 1EC, which sidelines 1EC offense. It means we have to start over in the 2EC with new defenses of epistemology, representations, etc. That puts us a speech behind, ensures the negative always wins. There are infinite things in 1EC. There are infinite things they could critique about the action about the 1EC that aren't about the action of it. They could critique any word or assumption, method or pronunciation, or even the body language of the 1A, which makes contestation impossible. Fairness outweighs. It's the only impact that can be remedied by the ballot. Debate is competitive activity, and abandoning fairness is tautological, because to say fairness is not an impact, you have to fairly evaluate the argument, which proves it takes priority over any offense. There's no defense to it in the 2NR, which means it should be incredibly easy to hang your hat here. If we win framework, that proves you should disregard any links that aren't about the action of the plan, and should disregard the alternative. It does not exist in the same world of the affirmative. Their intro provides no bright line for debates. There's no way to prove intent when debating the content of any particular affirmative beyond their strategic motives. But their intro justifies infinite critiques of authors. We put in the 1EC, their backgrounds of those authors, and a litany of other examples to make in-depth debate impossible, which means we're the only team in the debate with an internal link argument about actually creating reform versus abolition debates for you. For why abolition versus reform debates actually allows to occur. For you to write this ballot, you must look me in the eye in the RFD and explain why the, quote, full disarm versus incremental disarm debate requires you to entirely move the consequences of the plan and make it purely a question of telos and intent on scholarship. The negative has not forwarded an offensive reason why that's true that we do not already have defense to, which means you should makes it incredibly difficult for you to cast a framework ballot for the negative, but they have dropped debate does not shape subjectivity. There are many major alternative causalities like family, friends, etc., which means even if they prove that there is a capacity for debate to shape subjectivity, i.e. the arguments we read do sort of influence the way we think about them, it is not the largest internal link, i.e. we all come to debate with preconceived conceptions of what the world is like and how we ought to operate within it, and there is no capacity or impact argument in the 2NR that explains how debate is so sufficient to overcome all of those offensive reasons. But I'll answer the rest of their arguments here. Even if our education is non-unique, it's just a question about whether or not debates can be equitably given ground, i.e. their model turns solvency deficits into link arguments with impacts where they get to weigh the entire structure of whatever we do not solve against the case where the affirmative then has to first justify its scholarship and then explain why the small thing that they do does not get subsumed by the massive structures of violence and things that they have identified. But there's no impact of the neutrality dissad. We have not warranted exclusion or inclusion of indigenous demands. Rather, we have presented a piece of scholarship that proves it is necessary. They say fiat is bad. They have not answered our specific nuances in the 1AR that say that fiat is a political tool that allows us to imagine things. They have equally engaged in it insofar as the alternative posits a world where we sort of engage in a ethical, more valuable debate practice, which fiat is simply the idea of imagining a world beyond what constantly exists, which means there's not eternal impact of this, but the ballot cannot enact a plan, sure, maybe, but this is just a question of whether or not debates are ethical, but even if
But I'll answer the rest of the link argument here because the rest of the debate will be spent on the permutation which the 2 and R functionally conceded. The Vine link is not a link. Their all causes arguments have too many dropped warrants that make this a wash. 1, they've dropped the 2AC Parent and Martin evidence that says removing the missiles alone would make the transportation of military infrastructure across theaters functionally impossible, which means even if they win, there is violence that we do not solve. There's a larger risk of an internal link that the app accesses the most terminal form of their impact. 2, they have dropped the durable fiat and the 2 and R, which is both an external defense of our framework interpretation and understanding of fiat, and a reason why their link argument is not offense. Debates should be about the phrase should, not could. Otherwise, every app would always lose to the government won't do the plan because they're idiots. Durable fiat prevents the U.S. or future administrations from deploying INF in the region, which means that we only need to win a permutation to resolve the rest of the offense. The only lines on the permutation and the 2 and R are, quote, we've impact turn professionalization, which impact turns the permutation. It is game over. We do not need to win framework or even link defense since they have not proven a reason why the plan and alternative necessarily trades off. We read multiple reasons about why the permutation would solve their offense. They've dropped Sterling Fokker that says the plan creates self-reflexive subjects who are able to engage in and outside of the state. They've also dropped a link turn to their home framing, which magnifies offense for the perm. The app solves by reducing the target for Chinese counterforce strikes in the Asia Pacific, which directly obfuscates Lindsey Graham's die over there, not here framing, which turns their arguments about research because they have not advanced a model that has no response to those statements. There is no world where the alternative is competitive. They have argued about how the link turns and how they link turn it, but no conception of mutual exclusivity. The perm is not the next conception of engagement with the state, but rather a recognition that in the context of INF missiles, it is essential to remove them. They've also dropped the Perkovich card that says the perm can end nuclear violence because all or nothing approaches fail by never starting, and answers their arguments about disarm movements because of freeze movements, and all INF proof disarm is empirically effective, which is the 1EC court rate answers that they have the 1EC court rate evidence stations have not grappled with the entire debate. So permutation do both, solves the rest of their offense, but they cannot win metaframing of the world. The 1ER made several arguments about framing contingency and context. INF missile deployments perpetuate violence and cause nuclear escalation, which causes everyday external impacts, which means you only really need to evaluate 2 portions of the debate to cast an affirmative ballot.
Good debate.